Alors, ce soir, c'est une occasion rare pour moi de parler en anglais. So I'm going to completely profit from this and speak in English. But so thanks to the Gregg Center for organizing this event and in some exchanges with Lee Windsor, who's here tonight. We've been talking about, different ways that we can share research interests and between University of Moncton and UNB. And I think this is a great event tonight where we're featuring three very different perspectives on a theme that should interest all of us. And thanks to all of you for being here tonight. A special hello to those members from the Institute and my department who are here. Okay, so that's what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to start my timer because I kind of get interested in this. So. Okay, so the first thing I think when it comes to teaching this subject that I've kind of figured out in teaching a Canadian military history course, as well as dealing with military history in the colonial period, which is really my specialization, is that you have to engage narratives. Because if you don't make some sort of link to what's out there in the media or with government or with society, then students think that this is just something that's in your head and it's a particular obsession that you have that's almost antiquarian. So make the link with something out there. And so I found a few themes, things that are either perpetually in the news, the sort of birth of a nation narrative that has been around the commemorations for quite some time, as well as some of the particular items like this whole debate about the statue of Mother Canada on Cape Breton Island, to kind of demonstrate to students and get them thinking, and usually they have an opinion pretty quick if it's something that's been in current events, right? What do you think about a 60-story granite statue thrown onto a park on Cape Breton Island? Students, will respond to that, and that can be a leap-off point. For a long time, these narratives also tend to parallel things that are in the historiography. So it's useful as the historian, as a professor as well, to then kind of say, okay, well, here's some of the things that historians have said about these themes in the past. And here's where the current debates and discussions lie. And then they start to feel like they're part of that discussion. Now, yeah, there's like imposter syndrome issues, and they get shy, and how can I question the opinion of this great historian or whatever, but that's part you creating that learning environment where you can say, yeah, your opinion does matter. And as I often say to my students, it's actually not about opinions, it's about interpretations, because any idiot can have an opinion, but interpretation is something that comes from study and research that you bring to the table. Right? So, those are some of the themes that come up. One that really touches us tonight is French Canada. French Canadians weren't interested in the war. They didn't participate fully. It was a big issue, and then conscription came, and that whole debate just screwed relations between Quebec and the federal government for 50 years, right? Or maybe still. I don't know. That's another question. So, I'm not the only person who's studying the First World War. There's quite a few people working on some of these themes. And so I just picked a couple of them, the whole birth of a nation thing, some of the recent studies that have come out. There's many more. But I was really interested to read just recently Sean Cadigan's work on Newfoundland, where the sort of nationalism actually functions at a couple of different levels, right? There's the connection to Canada, but of course Newfoundland was its own dominion at that time. So what did that mean? Andrew Theobald's work on New Brunswick and the conscription crisis, probably the best study I've seen of New Brunswick politics at that point. And it really one of the few English-speaking historians that fully treats the Acadian political elites and their perspective on these things. So, right, on that special day, thousands of Canadians created Canada with their blood on Vimy Ridge, and from then we gained all this international recognition, right? Yes, we can't be, it's true to a certain extent, but of course the story is more complicated than that. This notion about, how many times have you heard about how awesome the Canadian soldiers were? The Germans feared them. They called them stormtroopers. Right? And Canadians had remarkable courage and valor throughout the war, but what about all those boys that we sent over? What about the thousands and tens of thousands and downright hundreds of thousands of Canadian men who were rejected for service? We talk about masculinity. We talk about how the country united behind this Canadian Expeditionary Force. What about those who got left out? What about those who were wounded? What about those who suffered? Gave their blood on Vimy Ridge, died horribly, suffering in the mud and the darkness, right? Like, how can we commemorate this in a positive way? It's got to be more complicated than that. So here's a little something. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is what I'm working on right now, which is a book on the soldiers of the Acadian Battalion. There was an Acadian Battalion created. Some of you have heard me talk about it before. And when you look at some of the numbers, you see that there were as many as 500 Acadians in the first contingent. I actually have a master's student who's looking at this group right now. Another 1,000 had enrolled by November 1915. Almost 1,000 more in this unit. Many more in other regional battalions. Maybe 5,000 Acadians in the First World War. 1 out of 5 of their eligible male population, which is exactly the same as the Canadian average. Well, these French Canadians are signing up just as much as everybody else. Okay, so there's a distinct story here that needs to be told, right? Nobody at the time recognized this. You look at the press, you look at what the politicians are talking about, oh, those damn Acadians, they're slackers. Just like those guys in Quebec. It's not true, but it becomes true in the minds of people because that's what they hear. Right? Pascal Poirier says, hey, this has become a national issue. We've got to do something about this. This is why he was behind creating an Acadian battalion, because our contribution lost in the crowd. Okay, so how can historical sources then confirm, nuance, or change these dominant narratives? And I'm really happy that Daniel is here tonight, because he actually was one of the partners that I worked with last year with the District Scolaire Francophone Sud, where we took some of the research results that I had, some of the databases of these soldiers, their letters, the military documents, and tried to develop some modules, some teaching modules, to see how high school students would interact with those and what they could do with them. And it was really fascinating, actually. There were 3 very distinct experiences in Dieppe and Shediac and Rogersville, and I visited 2 of them and gave guest lectures as well. That was really cool, and each was entirely different. 3 very different focuses. But what I found was, when you could convince these students that, hey, how old are you? Well, people younger than you are in this unit, right? Francophones, people from your community, I've got 6 of them from Rogersville right here. Right? Oh, I know that family, right? So suddenly it becomes more real to them, right? It doesn't just become the monument at Vimy Ridge, the war memorial at Ottawa. It's, hey, there's people in my own community who participated in this. And there was a study that was done by a group of historians, and they really emphasized that if we're going to connect with Canadians, and that includes students, university or high school or elementary, right? You have to make it local, family, and community, at least to start. That's the entry point to get their interest. Beyond that, hey, we can, like, in my day when we went through, maybe it was different in past generations, I don't know for you, I'd get really excited about big philosophical questions. Students today don't care about that. States of nature and social contracts, they don't care about that, right? But get them in from the local point. Okay, hey, are you willing to serve Canada today if we went to war? Oh, because that's what people your age did at that time. Okay. How much time do I have? I'm doing all right. Okay. So this is, I had the chance to go to England for a conference about minorities in the First World War. It was fascinating. Jews in the German army, Romanians in the Italian army, Senegalese in the French army, African Americans in the US Army, all these experiences about minorities looking for recognition in different ways and in different contexts. But it helped me to see that what the Acadian elites had in mind when they proposed creating this Acadian battalion was not that different from what a lot of other minorities were trying to do. And it kind of unified this story in a broader question about how minorities experienced the First World War. And what Hannah Ewens and Tim Grady have in particular focused on in this collection of essays that's going to come out is not just the war, but also the post-war transition. where you can really say, okay, so they served. X number of Romanians served in the Italian army, so what? X number of Acadians served in the Canadian army, so what? But can we trace what kind of consequences, what kind of impact did that have for the soldiers at their level, but also for their community, and for that kind of, did they gain that recognition that they were looking for or not, and why not, if not? In most cases, it's not. And in the German Jews case, of course, despite their huge contributions, they had the stab in the back theory and all of that, right? So what's truth behind this? Perception, the subjectivity of these things, really interesting to work with. So a few things that I pulled out of some of the documents. You see, like, what's going on here with these Acadians? Like, what's their motivation here? Evangeline, Le Moniteur, they're covering this. They're interested in this. It's almost like a soap opera. Every week they publish letters from the same soldiers so that people can follow him. Right? It's clearly something that people are interested in. And then there's the sad little note that there'll be no more letters from Private Richard because he died, whatever date, right? People were engaged in this. So then we create this unit, and people say, okay, this unit has to be perfect. Well, this isn't just any sort of pride in a battalion that recognizes a community. When you're a minority, you have to be perfect, right? Because if you screw up, the majority is going to jump all over your back. There's this anxiety that gets communicated through the almost over-the-top stuff that comes out of these recruiting assemblies and these newspaper articles about it. Forward the Acadian people, this priest writes a song to the Marseillaise for the Acadians. Forward for honor, assure the happiness of you and your children. How is going to fight in France going to help the children of Acadians living in Caracat? We do it through the church, of course, right? Parish priests on the pulpit saying, hey, this is our divine mission to go and do this. And we intertwine Acadian nationalism with divine interest, with appeals to military valor and glory. In this moment, we're more than ever, l'union fait la force. At this hour when the most humanitarian principles and events require all of our cohesion and all of our independence, you remain for us. You, the granite block of this great battalion composed of Acadians who know only victory or death. Whew. Heavy stuff, right? And we see it everywhere across Canada, but there's this particular context of how it's expressed in the Acadian communities. Persecuted and victims of the most despicable injustices, the deportation. The Acadian people understand better than anybody else what oppression and the breaking of human rights is all about. Okay. Let me finish with stories. People love stories. Right? So I can talk about general themes and philosophical questions all I want, but if I can give them a story and then a source, a letter or a report, something that they can read and try to unpack, okay, now they can kind of sink their teeth into that. So this is a great story, not great in the sense that this poor guy's dead, but 4 Acadian soldiers working in the Canadian Forestry Corps, the end of a hard day, go into a nearby village to have a drink. The 3 surviving soldiers advised that they didn't really drink that much. Maybe 2 liters of wine each. Okay. And when the mayor, who happened to be the owner of the cafe, showed up and said, okay guys, it's closing time, the 3 said, well, thank you very much. And they quietly went on their way, on the road, back to their camp, when out of the blue, a farmer jumped out, started screaming at them, and shot poor Jean-Baptiste Dague in the head with a shotgun. No idea what happened, why he did it. And then they went home to their camp, and they didn't tell anybody. Okay. Matthew Edmond, the farmer, tells a bit of a different story, as you might imagine. He knows these soldiers. He's had previous arguments and fights with these soldiers. And he came home to find his wife crying and all of the windows of his farmhouse broken because these soldiers are throwing rocks at them. So he goes out with his stick and he beats one of them over the head with it. And the soldiers say, we'll get you for this. And he goes to find the mayor, who happens to have his shotgun. I don't know why the mayor has his shotgun. He doesn't really explain this. And he comes back with the shotgun, and the 3 soldiers are still there, and they're yelling at each other. And then they jump him, and he shoots. One of them's dead. He claims it was a warning shot. Right? You see this here. Press the trigger without aiming at the same time receiving a blow on the head. So he's getting struck as he's shooting. What's going on here? Which story is true? Somewhere in between, obviously. But when you get something like this, you can say, hey, this isn't just a story about a bunch of Acadian soldiers who got propagandized into joining a war too young and ended up cutting trees in France. This was real. This was a life experience for them. And you can be sure, that they brought back scars and experiences and stories. There is an Acadian history of the First World War. In fact, there are multiple Acadian histories of this conflict, and this has to be claimed in the face of these dominant national narratives, I would say. We can do this through active learning, but we have to start from the local level. And that would be true of any Canadians, but I think it's particularly true in the case of Acadians and other minorities. And one of the real focuses that we've been trying to do, partly through this project, partly through an upcoming project with Jean Mance and the museum here, with a new exposition, or a new exhibit, is to make more of this source material accessible, not just at my level, but for teachers, for those in the community who are interested. So that's my time, and I'll shut up.